This is Defiance Daily Dispatches for the Defiant. I am your host, Miles Taylor, and tonight you are seeing how this administration is operating across the board on voting. Donald Trump is attacking mail-in ballots while, guess what, using them himself. We will tell you about that breaking story tonight. And at the Supreme Court, a case brought by the Trump administration now threatens whether those very mail-in ballots will be counted in time. And over in Congress, Republicans are now publicly blaming Donald Trump for prolonging the DHS shutdown while scrambling to pass a new plan. Remember that shutdown that they said was the Democratic shutdown? Well, Donald Trump now completely owns it. We will tell you why. And then on the ground, that fight is spilling into the courts, with states trying to investigate federal agents for crimes at ICE and being blocked. We'll bring you that story. And then we're going to go over to the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., where officials lost a crucial First Amendment case. You remember how the Pentagon kicked all the reporters out of the building? Well, those reporters won in court. And we'll tell you where the Pentagon wanted to stick them. It's not more than a little shed. Now they're probably going to be going back to court. We will break it all down. And on the election issues in particular, we have the great Max Flagrath with us from Fair Fight Action to walk through what is at stake for voting rights in this country, from the Congress to the Supreme Court and beyond. So let's start tonight with Donald Trump and mail-in voting. We're going to talk about a contradiction that made its way into the headlines today. A glaring contradiction that you almost want to ask yourself, how the hell did this happen? And what is happening with voting right now? Because this wasn't just some little rhetorical slip up. We're watching this play out in real time. Let me tell you what happened. Breaking news today shows that Donald Trump participated in the very act that he is trying to eliminate: mail-in voting. You might be scoffing right now, hearing me say this, saying that can't possibly be so. Donald Trump has spent months telling me that mail-in voting is worse than Nazi Germany. Mail-in voting is a threat to Western civilization. How could he possibly vote by mail-in ballot after all of that? Well, according to county public records, Donald Trump himself cast a mail-in ballot in a special election in Palm Beach County, Florida. I guess, for whatever reason, he couldn't fly to Palm Beach County, Florida to go cast his vote in person. I guess it's possible that sometimes people might have things to do on election day. They might have jobs. They might be disabled. They might not have the ability to go show up in person and might need to avail themselves of mail-in ballots. That's what the president did. Now, that election was for a state Senate seat and a state House seat. Now, remember, this is the same person who one day earlier had this to say about mail-in voting.
Brought to my attention today that we're the only country that does mail-in voting. Mail-in voting means mail-in cheating.
But it was.
Look, I could say a lot of things about this, but you don't need me to tell you that this is hypocritical. I will say, as a former Republican, hypocrisy has pretty much taken over every element of the party, and not just Donald Trump, but also his drooling sycophants across media. But that's a story for another time. Donald Trump is using the system while the system itself is on the chopping block. On Monday, the Supreme Court heard oral arguments in a case that could reshape mail-in voting nationwide. We go to NPR for this story.
14 states plus D.C. and some U.S. territories count mail-in ballots that are received after Election Day, as long as they're postmarked on time. The Republican National Committee argues this is an illegal practice because Congress set an election day. They argued that means that all voting and receipt of ballots end that day. However, Mississippi officials argued voters submitting their ballot in the mail by Election Day complies with federal statute, even ballots that aren't received by officials until after Election Day. Members of the court's conservative majority appeared to be skeptical of this argument, though 2 of the 6 were tougher to read. Liberal members of the court suggested, however, that it is up to Congress to set rules on how states run elections.
And while that legal fight plays out, here's what's happening behind the scenes, folks. Republicans say that new voting restrictions are about security, pointing to the Save America Act as the solution, the voter suppression bill in Congress we've been talking about a lot lately. They insist it won't make voting any harder. It's going to be fine. Voting's going to be easy. This is all a conspiracy theory from the Democrats to make you think that our bill is going to make voting harder. It won't. It just means you got to show up with an ID. That's what they have been saying. But experts, including our guest who we will have on today, will say the opposite, which is that it would create a real barrier to voting. In fact, I can attest that when my wife and I looked at the requirements, it was clear that if instituted today, the SAVE Act would allow me to vote, but not her to vote. She would have to go get a bunch of new documents. And once again, what's said in public doesn't match what's being said in private by Republicans, because today, newly surfaced footage shows exactly that gap. Here's Congressman Chip Roy publicly defending the SAVE Act. And then you'll see what he says privately in recently unearthed footage. Take a look.
A lot of people are asking questions. They're saying, well, that's going to prevent women who've got complications with name changes. Hold on. We actually allow a fail-safe that you go and you can sign an affidavit that says, this is my driver's license. My name is Sarah Jones on my driver's license. Here's my birth certificate, Sarah Smith.
My chief of staff had to go get a new ID in Virginia. Virginia's adopted the real ID system. So she had to go through a bunch of hoops. She's going to have to go back to the DMV twice because they want the paperwork for it.
Exactly what the founders intended when it came to voting. In fact, I think if you open up your pocket constitution right now, it says you have the right to vote, but only if you go to the DMV at least 2 times, and then you can show up at the polls. And we're sorry if that means you're too late for the election, because your mail-in ballot, we're not going to count it if it arrives after the election because you had to go to the DMV a bunch of times. It says that in the Constitution, right? I'm going to bring in Defiance.org co-founder Xander Schultz. Xander, I don't have my pocket constitution with me, but that sounds like the requirements for voting.
Yeah, and look, like America is already not the easiest place to vote in, right? We gutted the Voting Rights Act 10 plus years ago, Section 5, which required states to have pre-clearance from the federal government before they changed their voting laws. That was gutted. We vote on Tuesdays. There's registration deadlines that are weeks before the election. There are a number of things where America is already failing to live up to, I think, like an idealistic idea of democracy where the whole goal is everyone participates and we get a government that we decide is the most popular version that we want to be governed by. And so we're failing on so many fronts. And so the idea, and onto it, Miles, you know, something that we try to mention every time this stuff comes up, we don't have the problem they are declaring we have. This problem of fake voters is non-existent in this country. So the problem we need to solve, more participation in our system, not being solved, not being addressed, but the fictitious problem of fake voters or dead voters or immigrant voters or, you know, whatever kind of fictitious issue they're driving at here, apparently needs like mass action and, you know, be damned the women who've changed their name during marriage and having to jump through all these hoops, or the number of folks that, you know, would have a hard time getting to polls, you know, if we got rid of mail-in voting, rural voters, older people, et cetera. So yeah, it's nonsense. I don't know. It's nonsense.
I think you're being unfair to Republicans, Xander. I think they should go out and claim that they invented a time machine that will take us back to a time period before women could vote and African Americans could vote. This is a true modern marvel. They've invented a time machine. It's called the SAVE Act. To talk more about that, we're going to bring in our friend Max Flagrath from Fair Fight Action. Max, welcome to the program, my friend. It is great to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be back. Thanks for having me.
Tell me about Chip Roy, Max, and what this shows. Is it unfair to say that this is just naked hypocrisy? Is there some analysis that I'm missing here? You're the expert.
Well, you know, it lifts the veil, right? Publicly, Republican politicians, including Chip Roy, say the SAVE Act is designed to make it easy to register and vote. Whereas privately, they acknowledge that it creates, quote, hoops that people have to go through in order to do so. And, you know, Chip Roy gave a really direct, specific example that his chief of staff had to get a new ID. And Virginia has these new real ID sort of qualifications. So she had to make multiple trips to the DMV in order to get that figured out. So, you know, it really just kind of pierces the veil a little bit, goes behind the scenes, and shows you how these politicians really talk about these laws and bills when they think no one's watching.
Max, is there a like jujitsu move to be pulled here where it's using the momentum that they have or their attempts to get voter IDs mandated to do something that's maybe good for democracy broadly? I don't know, like the government is mandated to provide everyone with IDs, and those come with, I don't know, the ability to provide, the social programs they have directly on those IDs or whatnot. Is there some sort of chess move that we're missing here? And there's an opportunity to kind of roll with this, but set our own agenda and our own needs that allows for a more inclusive democracy rather than a more restrictive one?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a fantastic idea, though. I think you'd have to talk to an expert in the Senate about that. I'm not really the guy for that. But, if they want to force people to have IDs, you raise a really interesting question. Should we then be providing them?
Yeah. I mean, I was on with our friend Chris Cuomo over at News Nation the other night talking about this. And, Chris is kind of a populist. He tries to cut it down the middle and sometimes he's beating up Republicans, sometimes he's beating up Democrats. And I felt like he had a really reasonable take on this. And his take was, we need something like this, but only if we completely shift the burden from your average American to the government. You got to shift the whole burden. Any burden in here needs to go to the government, because the Constitution doesn't impose upon you the requirement that you prove that you are a citizen. You are presumed to be a citizen if you say you're a citizen of this country. And if the government thinks you're not, the burden is on them to show you're a liar, because the vast majority, 99.9% repeating of people in this country who claim they're a citizen are indeed a citizen when they're going to vote. We shouldn't penalize all of them because there's allegedly a small fraction of folks who are zombie voters or pretend to be citizens because they want to go wait in line and stand in the voting booth and punch the ballot. Okay, so then the burden's on the government to go do that. And exactly as you said, Xander, one of the outcomes would then be, if you need me to prove that I'm a citizen, make it so ridiculously stupid, easy, and fast for me to go with that voting ID. And then here is my favorite part. And I'm going to give credit to Chris Cuomo for this. Chris says, and if the response from Republicans is, well, that would be too hard and too expensive for the government to do, well, then it's most definitely too hard and too damn expensive for your average citizen to do. If the government says that this is not doable, well, then it's not doable. But if it is doable, then they should be the ones to freaking do it. That should be the answer. Sorry for the diatribe there. Max, I also wanted to ask you about something that's happening in another part of the country, which is that there's a bill in Mississippi that just passed the legislature. I want you to tell us about it, because that bill would impose some sweeping new proof of citizenship requirements on the voter, the same issue that I was just talking about, not on the state, but on the voter. Tell us about that and what that might be presaging.
Absolutely. Before I do, though, you mentioned burden, and I just want to harp on this for a second here. Chip Roy talked about his chief of staff, again, having to go to the DMV multiple times to get this figured out. Well, most Americans are working all the time, and the chief of staff, I assume, is working too, and they don't have time to go to the DMV multiple times. If you have to take time off work, you're losing money. If you have to have someone watch your kids for you to go do that, that's another cost of childcare. Not to mention the cost of gas if you're driving multiple trips, especially now that Trump's Iran war is driving up the prices of gas on a daily basis. So it's just important to note, you talk about burden shifting to voters. This is an affordability burden as well.
Yeah, it is. And I got to say, it's so frustrating to go talk to other people about this in my former political party. I mean, I'm still a conservative. I'm still on the right side of the political spectrum. I'm cool with the idea of people showing up and being like, yep, this is me, and going in to vote. But especially if there's some benefits attached to that. Like, I don't know, it'd be nice if you did that, if you got to go through the speed lane at voting and you got to vote a little faster, and there were some incentives, and not that TSA pre-check is the coolest thing in the world. I mean, airport security security sucks generally, but we have to have it because some assholes 25 years ago blew up buildings in this country. And, we want people to feel safe when they fly. But you know what? Pre-check, it was a pretty good government thing to say, hey, if you prove to us that you're not going to blow up airplanes, we're going to let you go through the line faster. Great. There's some things like that could be done. But then I go sit on sets on some of these shows with Republicans who are out there talking about the SAVE Act, and you pitch things like that, and they say, well, no. I mean, it's got to be this way. And you're like, oh, okay. So really what you're trying to do is you're not actually trying to make it easier to vote. You're not trying to make it more secure to vote. You really are trying to just suppress a bunch of Democratic votes. And and they give up the ghost pretty easily on that stuff, Max. And so, this example of Mississippi is that's another obvious case where there doesn't seem to be a lot of effort to make this easier for folks. It seems pretty much designed to just make it harder to vote.
100%. So yeah, taking us to Mississippi, the legislature just passed their sort of own mini SAVE Act. It's called the SHIELD Act. And it imposes essentially very similar requirements, documentary proof of citizenship. It has a similar issue with married women who have changed their last name. And in addition to that, there's some language in the bill that I'm not sure if this was intentional, but it seems to suggest that voters would have to drive from across the state to the state capital of Jackson in order to remedy some of these issues. And, Mississippi is the fourth most rural state in the country, with almost 55% of the population living in rural areas. Combine that with they are 49th in terms of how much of their population has a passport. So again, this is just adding hurdles, adding new requirements for the same reasons that we've been discussing. And, it's almost like these states are sort of receiving a signal that the Senate isn't going to be able to pass the SAVE Act, so they have to take action. I think you'll recall, I think it was last week or the week before, Florida passed its own sort of mini SAVE Act bill as well.
Xander, throw them back over to you. Did I lose you?
Sorry, gang. I lost. My internet froze for a second here. Sorry about that, gang. I came back and no one was speaking.
He's like, my
digesting it. He's digesting it for a minute.
Yeah, and if you're watching right now, the internets are a little bit choppy today. So if Xander and I both look like a 90s video game, that's because we are in a 90s video game. But no, Xander, I was just throwing back to you, but I have another question for Max.
No,
if you want me to
it's like a scene from some bad dream. Like it restart, everyone's staring at you, no one's saying anything. No, Max, I had a broader question, and this is more a philosophical one than anything specifically about this moment. We talk about oftentimes the barriers, the financial barriers to civic participation in the cases of, getting an ID. But I just want to, in general, we're at a point now where over 50% of our country doesn't have $1,000 in savings. Taking time off work in general is hard. When I meet with these indivisible groups I've been meeting with on the weekends, almost all of them are retirees because working people just do not have the time or energy to engage all the time in civic participation. I just wonder, what do you think is the tax American democracy is paying on having so much of our population live in poverty?
Oh, that's such a good question. And yeah, I mean, the barriers to civic participation are, being increased due to the added constraints on everyday life. People have to work harder and longer hours to make ends meet. And as a result, they have less time, less energy, less attention to spend on things like that. But I mean, that's why programs like y'all's are so important. We're trying to spread the word, remind people about what's important, and, give people sort of the key notes so they don't have to spend time they don't have reading tons of articles to figure all this stuff out. So, as these constraints continue to increase, I think independent media and, of course, mainstream will just be more important in covering these issues.
Yeah, and organizers like Fair Fight. And to be honest, I think one of the things you all do really well, or not just you all, but a lot of the infrastructure Stacey built, was New Georgia Project, the other organizing infrastructure. I think you all have done a tremendous job of trying to understand the priorities of folks that can't typically be participants in the ways that we hope everyone could be a participant, where you spend your weekends on this, you have your afternoons or whatever that you can spend on this, and making sure those priorities are still felt and you're making it easy for folks to understand those priorities and turn out. And so Fair Fight and their peers have just done a tremendous job of trying to solve that gap. But in my mind, we have to eventually solve the issue of poverty in America so people can be civic actors and citizens as much as they are professionals in society.
I also think on this conversation around the SAVE Act, I'm encouraged to see what has happened on the political left, because once upon a time, and this may be true or not true, but my viewpoint from the GOP was that Democrats were being disingenuous and they didn't want voter ID because they wanted to enable people to slip under the wire. But I have seen so much forward-leaning action from the left on here's how you could legitimately put in place additional protections. But again, I go back to that issue of, but the burden needs to be on the government. You can't just say, sorry, if you're a poor person in this country, it's just going to be harder for you. No, I mean, you cannot be disenfranchised from your most foundational democratic right based on income. That's just stupid. That's just completely stupid. It's a poll tax. It's completely unfair. That's not the way to go. There's obvious trade space and negotiation here. And I think what this whole debate has showed over the past few months is which side is actually being disingenuous about it. Max, what do you think ends up happening here going into the summer? Are we going to end up with a further balkanized voting system in this country where we see a blitz of these Republican state legislatures changing the rules in the lead up to the election, confusing voters about what the requirements are, and then this sort of frantic post-August push for people in September and October to actually figure out what it means to vote this cycle? I feel like a lot of people are going to be showing up at the polls and saying, wait a second, this isn't the place that I voted. This isn't the way that I used to vote. And this is not how people are supposed to be voting in this country. That feels to me like what's happening. But tell me if I'm being alarmist.
So potentially, but first, I want to give you a quick example of the sorts of we were talking about voter ID. I live in Georgia. There's voter ID laws here. It's not a big deal most of the time, right? But states don't always pass laws that are so simple. And a really glaring example of this is North Carolina in 2013. They passed a new law for voter ID, and eventually a judge struck it down. And he struck it down because during the legal process, the discovery, the trial and everything, they essentially found evidence showing that Republican state legislators, they got data showing which types of IDs Black residents of North Carolina were least likely to have. And they made that the required form of ID. The judge, when he struck it down, he said it essentially almost targeted Black voters with surgical precision. That was the quote. So I just wanted to give you an example of that for a minute to show you how some of these laws aren't always as simple as they appear to be. In terms of what we could see next, I think it's becoming increasingly unlikely that the SAVE Act will pass. Republican senators are even kind of tired of working on it. There was some coverage last week where several of them went on the record saying they wanted to focus on affordability issues, but the president essentially won't let them, which is pathetic. But I essentially think we're going to see Trump get really upset, and he's going to try to sign some new executive order, which will try to do things that the SAVE Act wants to do. But of course, we know that's illegal. We've seen this movie before. He's tried it in March of last year, and courts struck it down because, again, the president does not have the authority to regulate elections. The Constitution says Congress regulates elections and states run them. So I think that'll happen. I think it'll be more of a political signal to red states, Republican-controlled legislatures to say, hey, get going on this, guys. And so I think we're seeing some early rumblings in Florida and Mississippi. As far as will they be successful? It's going to depend a lot state by state, depending on when they have their sessions, when they end, because this is a campaign year. And a lot of times, politicians don't like being called back for a special session. They'd rather be on the trail to secure their reelection. So it's a mixed bag. I think it'll depend on the state. You may have another state or two moving on this quickly, but the rest remains to be seen.
This is we're all about the same age here. I didn't think, when I was this age, me and my peers would be talking about poll taxes. I was really hoping we could have exciting conversations around mobile voting.
That was something from history books.
There was so many, ranked choice voting, whatever. There's so many crazy ideas and ways we can make this more accessible or better. Max, if I'm gonna switch you and Trump with seats right now. You've got a Congress in your favor. You've got the Supreme Court in your favor.
How's my brain?
You didn't start a ridiculous war, so don't worry. You don't have that stress. What's let's put a positive twist. What is the thing you think America does need to do on voting? What would make a huge difference positively in including more voters if you had those powers?
Increasing the number of voting locations, especially across the South. A lot of them have been closed down over the years. On on its face, a lot of times it's said it's because of budgetary issues. A lot of time it's not. But that would do a tremendous amount in terms of access. In a lot of places you go, there's long lines. And that's sort of a deeper issue that you can get into the nitty gritty on. But a lot of it could be addressed by more voting locations. In addition, more early voting. We know working people have busy schedules. A lot of them are working multiple jobs in this economy, and more opportunities to cast their ballots would help. When you have expanded early voting, I believe there's statistics on this, but participation goes up. And so instead of clamping down on early voting, clamping down on mail voting, we should be taking steps to ensure that people have more opportunities to do so in ways that are secure. So I think if you essentially expand access through early voting, better mail voting, and then more actual in-person locations, you would see greater turnout.
Wow.
Well, Xander, you and I played
2028. Let's go.
Yeah, that's right. I loved the part where you said they were going to switch places. That's a great policy idea in general there. As we just switch Max with Donald Trump and solve like 90% of the problems that we're dealing with right now. So I don't know, but I think you're right, Max. I think eventually he gets he gets bored of this. Republicans want to move on to affordability. Trump will eventually as well. I mean, you're seeing that with the shutdown. I think even though Trump is digging in on the DHS shutdown, you'll see him get bored of this. He'll get bored of the Iran war. And it made me think, Xander, we love acronyms. You came up with TAKI. Trump always creates idols. I think we should say that boredom often overtakes Trump's yearnings, the things he wants to do. Boredom often overtakes Trump's yearnings.
Boats.
What are we spelling?
Booty?
That's booty. That's booty.
Booty.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Boredom often overtakes Trump's yearnings. This is true.
I'm here for it.
A short circuit in my brain. I was 90% sure you spelled boat for way too long.
So when Trump has his ADHD thing and jumps, from one thing to the other, we'll just call it booty from now on. I just, we got to have some levity in the fast slide towards fascism.
We might need a marketing push around that one. I don't know if it's quite as catchy, but that's all right. We'll get there.
Max is like, why do I associate myself with this show? This is very damaging to my reputation.
Not at all. Not at all. Glad to be here.
I know we've got to let you go, my friend. As always, I want to thank you. I hope you will come back and join us again very soon to shed light on all the craziness. Hopefully next time, though, we've got good news on some of these different pieces. We'll be watching the failed machinations of Donald Trump and MAGA Republicans to try to get the SAFE Act through. But it sounds like the bigger thing we need to be watching is what's happening state by state. So thank you for shedding light on that, my friend.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate y'all.
Thank you, brother.
We'll see you soon. Xander, Max is the best. It's great to have him on the program, always to shed light on these things. And especially because I think voting is just, people are going to feel like it's getting complicated this year. It should not be complicated. This should be very, very simple.
It is another good example, too, of like Trump does something loud and obnoxious and it gets everyone worried. And meanwhile, there's like quiet stuff happening at the state level to the point you just made that we actually need to keep our eye on and respond to. I thought his assessment of the situation is totally right. The Republicans are going to move on. He's going to do some executive order that's bullshit, but we need to keep our eyes on places like Mississippi and other states. So it's always nice to have him on and help us stay focused.
Well, our next story, Xander, we alluded to in that conversation, which is that yesterday it was uncovered that Republicans had a plan to fund DHS and to get TSA workers paid. In fact, I think some of that news broke while I was sitting on set at CNN. Some folks were kind of excited that maybe this whole thing would be over with. But that proposal, which would have reopened most of the department, well, sounds like Donald Trump has turned it down again. And now one of Donald Trump's biggest allies cannot seem to stay quiet about the fact that this all lies at Donald Trump's feet. Take a look.
Senator Cruz and I came up with a plan. We said, look, it's a two-step process. The Democrats have offered to open up everything but ICE. Ted and I said, okay, let's accept their offer. And then at the same time, we would offer a bill for reconciliation where we don't need any Democratic votes to do whatever we wanted to do with ICE. And that way we're out of the shutdown and DHS is back open. We submitted that, Senator Thune submitted that to President Trump, as is his right. He said no. No deals with the Democrats. So we're back to square one.
We are back to square one because the president said no. So now that Donald Trump's opposition is public, well, who owns this shutdown? Today, Senate Republicans say they have a new proposal, something else, but by new, I mean almost exactly what was proposed over the weekend. That proposal would fund most of the Department of Homeland Security immediately, including TSA. It would also keep other components running like CBP and ICE Homeland Security investigations, but it would not fund ICE's enforcement and removal operations, ERO, the part of the agency that carries out arrests and deportations. That piece would be handled separately. In a later bill, Republicans plan to move through that budget reconciliation process. And instead of including the SAVE Act in this bill, Republicans now say, which is what Donald Trump wants, Republicans now say they plan to take up that separately as well through the same process. As the Senate begins to lay a path to a vote, lawmakers are now feeling the shutdown themselves. Delta Airlines has suspended special airport perks for members of Congress during the shutdown. You don't get a fast pass, members of Congress. No more expedited service. They got to go through the same line as everyone else. I got to say, it's a pretty smart thing to be doing right now to put pressure on these members of Congress. But because of staffing shortages and resource constraints are affecting the entire system, they can't be giving special privileges to members of Congress to speed through the line. And the doling out of consequences due to ICE's actions as a result are not limited to airports and lawmakers. Today, Minnesota prosecutors sued the federal government in a related story, also having to deal with ICE, seeking access to evidence that they say they need to investigate and potentially prosecute federal agents involved in a series of shootings during an immigration crackdown. You may be asking, Miles, how are these two stories connected? Well, this is exactly why Democrats have said there need to be changes at the Department of Homeland Security before it reopens. There need to be changes because ICE agents have been running around killing people, running around violating Americans' rights. Now, a lot of those changes Republicans are willing to accept. But again, Donald Trump does not want to cut a deal. So in Minnesota, those prosecutors are suing to get that evidence so that they can hold federal officials accountable. This would be the three incidents that we all saw play out in Minneapolis. The murder of Renee Nicole Good and Alex Preddy, both U.S. citizens. A third person who was shot and injured in the leg. The lawsuit, by the way, names Attorney General Pam Bondi and outgoing DHS Secretary Kristi Noem as defendants. State officials say federal agencies have refused to provide basic evidence in these cases, including even the names of the agents who opened fire. And in the case of the survivor, video evidence contradicts the initial account given by federal agents. Now, if a lawsuit wasn't enough, officials from inside the department are now turning on each other. In an interview with the New York Times, Gregory Bovino, a senior Border Patrol official involved in the administration's immigration operations, who we all saw prancing around the country as Donald Trump's de facto crackdown chief, is now openly criticizing agency leadership. At one point in that interview, Bovino targets Donald Trump's border czar, Tom Homan, bringing up past allegations that Homan accepted a $50,000 cash bribe in a paper bag. Bovino says in that interview, quote, "You're not going to see me talking to anyone for a bag of money." Xander, I want to bring you back into the conversation. Of course, this has devolved into infighting. I also think the tragedy of Greg Bovino is something that people need to see throughout the Donald Trump administration. March around the country acting like a Nazi, and you're not going to have some sort of glorious end with this guy. You're going to have a depressing end befitting of the actions you undertook in that position. And Greg Bovino joins a long line of ex-Trump officials, believe me, to humiliate themselves for this man and end up, surprise, humiliated.
Yeah, you will be the scapegoat for something that Trump doesn't want to own eventually. I mean, I just saw in China, they just purged like their fourth general in like 5 years or something like that. Like, this is how the authoritarianism works. Is the top guy never goes down. Top guy never goes down, but he will happily snipe the people around him if he needs to do some sort of reputation cleanup, right? I'm wondering, Miles, and I wasn't sure about this. Does Kennedy and Thune need permission from Trump to pass this bill? Like, even the way.
But I mean, here's the dilemma. What they're worried about is if the president says no and he's going to veto it. They definitely don't think they have veto-proof margins to get something like this through. And so, but I mean, here's the frustration. If you're a Republican, is now it's not even clear what they can do to satisfy Trump. In fact, he said just before we came on the air, he said, I'm not sure there's any deal that can satisfy me, which may be his way of saying, fine, I'll take whatever stupid thing they pass. I won't veto it. I'm going to say that I'm unhappy about it and I wouldn't have supported it and just move on. That may be what Donald Trump is ultimately trying to do. But look, he's boxed himself into a corner. And I want to disabuse people of the notion that there's some sort of strategy happening at the White House. I mean, this was always the frustration when I was in the administration, is there would be a very important issue on the goal line, a diplomatic negotiation, a bill, a shutdown. We would think we had a solution, and the president would just go high and right and just make stuff up and just wing it and say, nah, I'm not going to do it, and just throw everything into total disarray. It's why we were in, when I was there, a 35-day shutdown, which was the longest up until that point, the longest federal shutdown, is because Donald Trump said just before Christmas, I want more money for the border. And there was no deal for more money at the border. And we were shut down for 35 days. TSA agents lost their pay. And guess what? Donald Trump didn't get anything for it. We reopened the government because the pressure was too great, because people weren't getting paid. That's it. The guy doesn't have a plan. This is not, as Steve Bannon says, 4-dimensional and 5-dimensional chess. When are people going to realize that? The guy's not smart. He's an idiot.
Yeah. Do you think we might be approaching an important moment where the Republicans sitting in Congress decide, you know what, even if he's saying he's going to veto it, I'm feeling enough pressure from my constituents to do certain things. Yeah. And therefore, I'm going to put a bill in front of him. And you might have a situation where he vetoes a bill they put in front of them, and then there's like real friction between Congress and Trump that we've been looking for a while.
I think he sees that possibility because Republicans were just over at the White House last night. Republican senators were over there having conversations with them. I've got to imagine some of them said, like, we have to pass something. We have to pass something. Yeah. We cannot, amidst a war that's driving prices up, amidst threats about voting, amidst, his agents marching about the country, intimidating people. We cannot shut down air travel in this country. And by the way, he's done them a huge disservice by showing that Republicans very clearly own this, because he's just saying no to everything reasonable. So I think they'll jam him if he doesn't do something, which means just pass the bill, send it over the House passes it, send it to the White House, and dare the president to veto it. But before it even gets to that point, maybe it's happening while we're on air now, I suspect Trump will signal, fine, do it anyway. And he'll make some comment. He'll probably attach some Steining statement to the bill that says, I don't believe in this, and slap it on there and find some way to declare pseudo victory and move on. But he's boxed himself into a corner here, just like he's boxed himself into a corner on Iran. This is kind of what happens when you don't think ahead. This is kind of what happens when you don't plan, except in this case, it's not just like the student that keeps forgetting to take their lunch money to school. It's like the guy running the country.
I mean, I'm excited to see what happens when they move on to affordability. Would it be not start a war with the Middle East that drives up oil prices globally? Like, what is their affordability move here? That's not just undoing what the fuck they did. I have a sweeping,
comprehensive affordability plan for Republicans in the Trump administration. It's called Stop Taxing Everything Through Tariffs and Stop Starting Wars. If they did those two things, I swear to God, right now, prices on almost everything would go down. That's it. Just stop starting wars and stop slapping tariffs. This is totally in their control. Anyway, it's a simple plan.
I'm excited to see what
easy
their
to implement.
Is. We don't have to project, but just like I just wonder, like, if it's probably not going to be that. I wonder what their big ideas are for driving down the prices they drove up through insanity.
It's generous of you, Xander, to even assume that there's big ideas out there. But look, we mentioned the war. We've got one final story today about that organization that's presiding over the war for Donald Trump over at the Department of Defense. The Pentagon is moving forward with new restrictions on the press, just days after they lost in court on restrictions on the press. On Friday, a federal judge ruled that the Defense Department's media policy, which basically forbid mainstream media outlets from being inside the Pentagon unless they signed basically a loyalty oath, well, that judge ruled that it violated the First Amendment, unsurprisingly, and the due process rights of those journalists. The policy allowed the Pentagon to revoke press credentials from reporters seeking information not authorized for release, even if that information was unclassified. So hypothetically, the defense secretary could say, you can't tell a reporter what's available for lunch in the lobby. It's a pretty obvious First Amendment violation. It didn't take any legal experts to see that from the very beginning. And so the court ordered the Pentagon to restore the badge access of those journalists. But instead of reopening the workspace that they've used for decades at the Pentagon decided, after they were ruled against, that they're going to shut down that workspace. In a statement Monday, the department said it had closed the correspondence corridor inside the building and will move reporters to a separate annex outside the Pentagon. That facility is not yet ready. In the meantime, journalists will be required to have escorts to enter the building outside of official briefings. Yes, I remember that in the First Amendment, that part of the First Amendment that says someone in the government has to hold your hand if you are going to obtain information, even unclassified information. Obviously, I'm being facetious. The Pentagon says the changes are about security, but the judge's ruling said the department could still screen for security risks. And press groups say the new plan violates both the letter and the spirit of the judge's ruling. The New York Times says it is preparing to go back to court. Xander, this damn circus just never ends with these people. But I'm going to say the good news right now. I'm going to say the good news, which is that as much as this administration is trying to go to war with the mainstream media, to keep them out of the building, to sue newspapers, to threaten their broadcast licenses, it is not working.
Yeah. Have we checked on Project 2025? It feels like they got to the end of their list and they're just circling back on shit now. It's like, dude, let's prosecute Comey again. You're probably going to get like an even meaner executive order against you, Miles. We should be on the lookout for that. Like, just feels like they got to the end of their agenda. They're like, all right, well, let's try it again. But it's failed. To your point, so many of these have failed. It's not scary like it used to be. It was never going to work, right? Like, I don't, well, maybe I'm kind of overstepping there, but I believe it was never going to work. But they were hoping their actions were going to have such a cooling effect and forced capitulation and fear that they were going to get a lot of their agenda accomplished. It doesn't work the second time through. You know, if we already see it's a bluff or the institutions are going to hold them back, it doesn't have the same cooling effect. And they're like, I think they're almost out of moves in some ways.
Well, mark my words, 2026 becomes the year that the judges really start to get pissed off. I mean, last year, the administration ignored a number of court orders. They've delayed things and deferred things. This is yet another example of the administration sort of dragging its feet in compliance with a court order, violating the spirit of that court order. Judges are going to start to get pretty pissed. And you saw a little bit of that this year. We've had some courts when DOJ lawyers have failed to fulfill the requirements of the court. We've had some of those courts slapping sanctions on those lawyers, literal fines on Justice Department lawyers for noncompliance. They're hesitant to do those things. But I'm telling you, as 2026 continues, they keep doing shit like this. You're going to see the courts say, now, we're going to personally start penalizing some of these officials, holding them in contempt of court. In extreme situations, a court can say, no, you go to jail for this. Now, you might say, well, it's the Trump administration that has to go and arrest them. Well, I don't know. It's possible some of these people were held in contempt of court, and the Trump administration, it ain't going to be around forever. These consequences are going to follow people. In fact, you're seeing a lot of state bar associations around the country threaten investigations over some of these lawyers' law licenses in the administration because they are operating in bad faith. But I go back to media, Xander, because as much as they try to shut down the mainstream media, folks like our organization and our members at Defiance.org are going out there and supporting independent media, funding independent media, encouraging independent media. And guess what? Some of the most groundbreaking reporting that is happening right now is coming out of independent media. I happily mention our friend Scott McFarlane from CBS News, their incredible justice correspondent who just this week jumped into the independent media pool. He's going to go join Midas Touch. And I think as of today, he was breaking more news stories. They can't stop us. They can't stop these folks. They cannot stop the truth from coming out. And they're going to look stupider and stupider the more they try.
Totally. It just, we've talked about this before, but they're forcing a migration to a decentralized media infrastructure that is much harder to attack, that is more resilient, that's going to cover more ground, that's going to provide more niche news in different areas that are usually neglected by traditional media, that's going to leverage citizen journalism like Ellie Leonard does, like Tara McGowan and Courier does. We talk about independent media. There's also citizen journalism that's exploding, and the participation of you all in investigations like the Epstein files. So it's the first time. I've also seen people kind of turn away from the more toxic types of social media. There's a self-awareness around the algorithms of traditional social media and whatnot too. And it's the first time I've honestly been bullish on a better information environment in maybe 15 or 20 years. There was probably a peak right around the Arab Spring where Twitter was an accelerant to those revolutions. And then right around that 2012, 2013, it's been a steep decline in my belief that decentralized internet would facilitate a healthier information environment. But I think we're starting to get there. We're seeing really positive signs that we're moving towards a healthier, more powerful, more decentralized, harder to attack information environment.
Well, look, let me say this also. It would be a pertinent time to say, please like, share, and subscribe, because it's one of the things that we are doing. If you just heard us talking about this and you're like, yeah, but I'm not going to like, share, and subscribe, well, then I'm going to send you to the website you should go to. Go to whitehouse.gov, because you should be on their team then. If you don't want to like, share, and subscribe in the new media realm, just go follow the White House. That's where you should get your news then. But this is the front line right here. We are not scared to tell these stories. I'm serious. We are not scared to tell these damn stories. Last night, when I was on one of the cable news networks, there are good people I sit with in some of these conversations, good, honest conservatives who do believe that the president is good for their party and the country. I don't agree with them, but I get along with them. Then there are other people who are out there just following along, just licking Donald Trump's boots from toe to heel because they think it will help them get ahead in this world.
Yeah.
You want to know something? You go back into history, and one of your best signs that your country, a country, is sliding into autocracy is people whose tongues have a magnetic attraction to the boots of the leaders, who just can't handle it, who are so thirsty for licking those boots. And you see it. You know who they are. But when you see it, you should also know, something bad is happening to my country. And that's why you've got to be able to, as you say, Xander, diversify your media sources. You've got to protect the First Amendment by making sure it's got little safe havens all over the place, not just these big institutions they can come after. That organization I was on with last night, CNN, they just got taken over by one of Donald Trump's buddies. Paramount, owned by his billionaire buddies, now, according to reporting, has plans to go fire anchors that Donald Trump and the White House don't like. I hope that doesn't happen, but I'm not holding my breath. So we cannot depend on those places to stand up for the truth when the bootlickers are going and taking over those organizations. So if that wasn't compelling to you to like, share, and subscribe to organizations like Defiance, again, check out whitehouse.gov. You'll love it. They've got all the information for you. Xander, we go to our favorite segment of the day and every day.
If you do go to whitehouse.gov, prepare to be either entirely fearful of Iran or not at all every other day. Also, they're obliterated or an imminent threat every other day. So let us know. Go do that for a week and then come on back. It's okay. You'll have a blast over there. It's like getting electrocuted in the face every 5 minutes. We go to our favorite segment of the day. Who is joining the Defiance? I'll tell you, folks, sometimes people join the Defiance without meaning to. We have a lot of those. Those are personally my favorites in the program as kind of the cell phones in favor of the Defiance. And this week,
That's exactly what happened inside Donald Trump's own Justice Department. The administration has been trying to build a criminal case against Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell over allegedly cost overruns in the building of the headquarters for the Fed and for their renovation project. Donald Trump has been publicly claiming there is criminality in there somewhere. Jeanine Pirro, who's the prosecutor who opened that inquiry for Donald Trump, issued grand jury subpoenas. And the clear pressure campaign was this. They really wanted to force Jerome Powell to lower interest rates or resign or both. That's clearly what Donald Trump wanted. In fact, the judge overseeing the case made clear he felt like that was obviously what Donald Trump was trying to do, opening a criminal case to intimidate his own Federal Reserve Chair to get him to lower interest rates. So, of course, when that case got into court, the story completely fell apart with those details coming out. And in a closed-door hearing that was later unsealed, the chief of the criminal division in Jeanine Pirro's office, the Trump prosecutor, admitted that the Justice Department did not actually know what evidence it had of fraud. In fact, pressed by the judge, the prosecutor also admitted they didn't even know which parts of Powell's testimony before Congress were supposedly false. Remember, this was the thing they were investigating. They were investigating potentially false testimony before Congress. That prosecutor, when asked, says, I don't know. We haven't even gotten to the part of reading the transcript to know where there might have been a crime committed. So while they didn't mean to, by simply choosing not to lie under oath, Donald Trump's prosecutors just handed the Defiance in this country a major win. And to that, we say thank you and welcome to the Defiance to Donald Trump.
Miles, can I share something real quick? Let me see if I can bring it up. This is the inflation rate when Erdogan tried to do something very similar once upon a time in Turkey, not too long ago, 2015. You tried to artificially suppress, lower inflation, and your inflation, interest rates, and your inflation goes through the roof. Turkey experienced 80% inflation. I think that's 2015 or 2016 right there, when Erdogan did just this. And so not only is it a bad thing to do, it is like a economically catastrophic thing to do, to artificially push down interest rates.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing, Xander. We got to find better ways to talk to people about this because folks' eyes glaze over when they hear interest rates.
Yeah,
it's not every day you're applying for a loan. Just like affordability is easier because you go to the grocery store at least once a week and you're like, yeah, shit's more expensive. Easy to explain. You start talking about interest rates and people are like, I don't know. I'm not applying for loans all the time. The easy way for people to understand this is Donald Trump wants to make it so cheap for anyone to borrow money. Why is that bad? Because then everyone's borrowing money and the value of a dollar just goes down. That literally means your savings account is worthless. It can't purchase as much as it was. Your retirement account is neutered. It's neutralized when something like this happens. And that's what we see in autocratic countries. So you say to yourself, why does a dictator want to do that? Well, because in the short term, it feels kind of good. In the short term, it's like a high for the economy. Everyone's got cash in their pocket, so they're all spending cash. And it makes it so that they love the leader, and it looks like the economy's humming along. But then, after a little while, when everyone's got cash, everyone's cash is worth less. Xander just showed that in a chart. It's like mathematical certainty. This is the closest thing to eternal law that there is in economics. It's like fucking gravity in economics. And Donald Trump, who knows nothing about economics or physics or space-time, doesn't understand that. Doesn't understand that he would take the wheel of our economy if he did this, and he would pull it right when we're going along next to the cliff and next to the ocean, and he would crash this economy. That's what Jerome Powell's trying to stop him from doing. I don't know how Jerome Powell votes. I don't give a shit how Jerome Powell votes. But I do care that Jerome Powell is like, we shouldn't jerk the wheel when we're on the edge of a cliff. We need adults like that. Donald Trump is not one of those. And Xander, I'm so glad you point to how this happens in other countries, because it's the mistake we're right on the cusp of making. And just remember, Jerome Powell's term as Fed chair ends in a few weeks, and Donald Trump's guy comes in. I don't know what's going to happen after that. I don't know if Donald Trump's guy is going to do what he wants.
Yeah, and that's the point you made earlier in the episode, where Trump doesn't think in the long term. Like, even if he did understand economics, which I doubt he does, he really is just trying to get that short-term boost to make people feel good from now till the midterms. And so all of his plans are, long-term catastrophic for this country across every category.
Have we not learned that about this guy? He's literally about short-term gratification in literally every aspect of his life. Everywhere. Everything we've been talking about today.
Named after me. How are the steaks? They're terrible. The company's going to go bankrupt. It doesn't matter. I want to say there's a steak named after me. Trump steaks, 100%. Yeah, it's just a nonsense way of thinking. Anywho, do you want to go to Q&A?
Let's take some questions. Let's take some questions from Defiance.org members. If you are a Defiance.org member, you can go into the chat on Substack. You're the only ones who are allowed to post in the chat on Substack, and you can put in questions. If you want to know the deepest, darkest secrets of Xander Schultz's life, this is not the place for those questions. You can send those to support@defiance.org. You can send those emails there. If you want to know those secrets, you can send them
email my wife for those.
You can email his wife. Gigi asks, why isn't the burden on the legislators pushing for this act, the SAVE Act, I think is what Gigi's referencing, to prove there is a real issue with actual evidence? Gigi, it's a great question. I will tell you that when I was in the Trump administration, the first Trump administration, which was a pride-swallowing siege every single day, in the words of Jerry Maguire, we ran a review of voting fraud claims in that administration. And it won't surprise you, Gigi, to learn there was not systematic voter fraud happening across the United States of America. That wasn't the Obama administration that did that review. It wasn't the Biden administration. It was the Trump administration. We could not find sweeping evidence of voter fraud. And so, yeah, I think you make a very good point that legislators in Congress or in the states who are pushing for these types of voter requirements need to actually put up the evidence, or better, put the burden on the government if there is concern about fraud, instead of sticking it on the rest of us who just want to go exercise our First Amendment rights. Exercise our right to vote. Xander, I'm going to jump to you for the next one.
Well, real quick, part of what we're facing here is an information environment issue that the folks, those senators or Congress people are appealing to, aren't getting that information all the time. And so one of the things we're working on, I don't know if we'll ever announce it here, is trying to get information to the right and to MAGA to make sure that they are aware of what Miles just said. It is a challenge of our time. It is a challenge of our time to chase down lies with the truth. There's a saying that's, a lie goes around the world twice or three times before the truth can lace up its shoes. Trying to make sure the truth can follow lies is so hard in this information environment, and get to the types of voters that are being lied to all the time. We have a country, like, it's very easy to be mad at our peers and our countrymen for supporting these people, but it's almost impossible sometimes to imagine the information environment they're living in, and how little of the information that to be true is getting to them on a daily basis, and how many lies they are being flooded with all the time. And so therefore, that reality makes me take a step back from feeling like my countrymen are opponents of mine. The liars are opponents of mine. The Trump and his minions are opponents of mine. But we almost have a duty and obligation to try to reach out to our peers, our fellow citizens, and make sure they have the information they need to be a participant, an honest participant in our democracy. A democracy requires that we all live on the same facts. It's impossible to operate if we don't live on a shared truth, on a foundation of a shared truth. And so it's going to be a project for some time. It's not an easy one, and but it needs to be part of our bigger project here in terms of restoring a democracy.
I mean, Xander, that's why, if people want to understand the psychology of Donald Trump, I'm not a licensed psychiatrist, but I can tell you what I've observed, which is that the guy lies so much because he knows what you just said. He knows if he lies, it spreads faster, but then it's like he's chasing a high. I mean, he's like a heroin addict, because he has to keep lying to prevent people from covering up those lies and holding him accountable. He's just got to keep lurching from lie to lie to lie. And that's why he's become this sort of propulsive liar. There's also some deep irony about that quote you note, Xander. The quote proves itself, and I'll tell you why. The quote famously is, "A lie travels halfway around the world before the truth can put its pants on." It's commonly attributed to who was the UK wartime leader. It's commonly attributed to Winston Churchill. But what's funny is when you go, when you go look that up, you find out that actually Winston Churchill wasn't the one that first started using that quote. And in fact, then people trace it back to, oh, that's a lie that Winston Churchill came up with that quote. It's actually Mark Twain. And you're like, oh, okay, well, that's ironic that it was the quote's a lie. But then you dig further and you find out, actually, that's not true either. Mark Twain isn't the source of that quote. You dig further, and I'm pretty sure it's Thomas Jefferson that was the one who originated a version of that quote. That just goes to show you, even a quote about how fast a lie spreads gets misattributed instantly. But I'll tell you what, the lesson here is not just start lying, because there's nothing that suffocates the lie better than if you carry around a mirror with yourself. You don't have to go disprove every single individual lie. You just have to hold up a mirror to the liars. And it's like putting kryptonite in front of Superman's face. They completely wither. They cannot handle being confronted with the hypocrisy. They cannot handle being called out. It totally breaks their system. And that's what we have got to be doing to the MAGA movement over and over and over, is showing them the hypocrisy of the liars at the top. And that thing you mentioned, Xander, efforts to try to inject information into MAGA circles is very important, especially if you are helping surface for them the hypocrisy of the man they claim to follow, because that's what their media is not telling them. It's not showing them that truth. They're just filtering it out because it doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good. Well, sometimes you got to feel kind of bad. And we've seen the Thomas Masseys and the Marjorie Taylor Greens get that icky feeling about that hypocrisy and stand up because of it.
Yeah. Well, we got a question from Martha Green here. The government knows I'm a citizen during tax season. Why can't they identify citizens during voting season? It's a brilliant framing. And so it's better than I oftentimes say, look, my bank lets me transfer things on my mobile phone, huge, sums of money. And they're able to identify me through facial recognition on my phone, et cetera. Why can't, this is even better. You're right. We already have an interaction with the government where they're very confident they're talking to the extent that they offer refunds or they take capital. It's a great example. It's great framing.
My takeaway from that, Xander, is you said you're moving big sums of money.
For a nonprofit leader, when I buy my used truck, whatever.
Tell me,
it's all relative. It's all
where
relative.
Are you
I'm not
these
pushing
big
crypto.
Sums of money, man. Bring me in on it. Martha Green. Martha Green for president. That's a great framing. Martha, I'm going to steal that from you. I'm going to try to attribute that to you as much as possible. But that's such a great point. How come the government knows I'm a citizen during tax season, but not when I go vote? And Martha, my answer would be, they need to go spend the same amount of money they're spending on taxes. We spend tens of billions of dollars on the IRS to go make sure we validate everything and get every last damn penny from you. Okay, well, if they want voter ID, or if they want certainty that a voter is a U.S. citizen, then go spend billions of dollars and invest in the voting infrastructure to make it easy the day of for someone to show up and prove, if they need to, if challenged, I am me, and and they get their document for free to prove I am me. That'd be great. Build a mobile DMV that's at every single polling place. Make this easier. Make this easier.
I keep thinking, the way you're framing it, Miles, I keep thinking that's the way, to frame this. Is fine. The burden on the government is the best possible framing I've heard yet. It's sure, you guys want to make the system more secure. You want to make it easier for folks to vote. You want to protect our democracy. Go ahead, do whatever you need to do. It's a government program. Any failings is on the government. The whole infrastructure is on the government. And it's a failure, by the way, if participation drops. That should be literally, it fails if participation drops from, this cycle from last cycle. all, I think it's like, because it does feel weird. Sometimes I'll admit this, like coming from the racial justice space where we talk about how race or identification laws are racist. It's to your point about inflation. It's a nuanced conversation. It's not like a simple conversation to have. And so there's a version of it. And that's why I was pressing Max on earlier today. There's a version of it where like we get something from whatever they're trying to accomplish. We get some infrastructure. It's easier to get an identification as a citizen. It's easier to get a passport as a citizen. So few Americans have a passport. So maybe that becomes a great government program. I love this framing. Let's keep picking at it.
And what could be more important than that? What could be more important? I mean, the Trump administration right now is asking for $200 billion for a war with Iran that 92% of Americans want to end. They don't want to be there. I've got to imagine, I could do some rough math on my phone. I've got to imagine $200 billion is enough to buy an identification document for every single living and breathing American, especially the ones that don't already have a passport or a real ID to take to the polls. I got to imagine that's enough money. Here's a crazy policy idea. Stop the damn war. Stop it right now. Let's propose in Congress that we fund an effort to make sure, maybe it's not logistically possible by this election, but by the next one, we get everyone the document they need. We improve the process so it's not a pain in the ass. And there we go. Just put that money towards that. I think 92% of Americans would agree.
After we get this orange clown out of here, I like that as the next one of the next Defiance projects.
He's not even a clown. Clowns are funny sometimes.
That's true.
This guy isn't even funny. He's like that maybe murderous it's more like clown. And those, yeah. There we go. We're on the same page. Mac Bear asks, do you want the IRS to share your information with other branches and functions of government? I don't. Nope. Hard pass on that one. Mac Bear, I'm glad you asked that question, though, because right now, during this administration, there has been sweeping efforts undertaken for the IRS to start sharing its data with other parts of the government. There's been public reporting to even show that the FBI and the IRS are starting to combine, which happens sometimes if they've got to, if the FBI's got to investigate fraud. But apparently there's task forces now to help the FBI use IRS information to go after the president's political enemies, to go after protest organizations under the guise of domestic terrorism. This is scary stuff. And there's a case going on right now of a guy who worked for Doge who allegedly left with the thumb drive with like reams and reams of IRS data. The sharing of data in this administration, I think we're going to find this is one of the we're just seeing the tip of the icebergs of the controversy. There's been so many breaches of the Privacy Act and other data protection laws by this administration because they brought a bunch of stupid flunkies in who've never served in government and don't understand what you're allowed and not allowed to do. And it's resulted in all of these insane breaches that are only just now starting to be reported on. So I think it's a much bigger story.
Yeah. Well, I want to make sure I see in the chat a lot of people are asking about No Kings 3 and if we're going to talk about that. We are going to talk about that. Baby. Tomorrow, we will be talking about that. So tune in 5 p.m. Eastern. That's the whole focus. What are we doing for No Kings? How are we mobilizing America? Make sure you show up for that conversation. It's our mission briefing, as is every Wednesday. So we're granting out some money. We're supporting organizations. We've got a plan. We've got actions for you. So make sure you tune in tomorrow for that.
Yeah, well, and I'll prep people for it because, there's going to be a tight turnaround before Saturday of folks going out to the events all around the country. One of the things that we are going to provide tomorrow, something that a lot of folks have been asking for, is a couple of posters from defiance.org that if you want to go encourage people to come be a part of the Club for Courageous Americans, then you can print those. And I'm giving you a heads up, because maybe you have a printer at home, maybe you don't. You may want to send those files to a FedEx or a Office Depot or another place that prints in your community to make a sign. So just get ready for that because you'll have a couple of days after we announce these. And we've had amazing people like Igor and others propose to make their own posters. So tomorrow we will also give you a special QR code that will send people to Defiance that you can attach to any poster you want and take that to the rallies. Xander and I were just sitting on the computer doing this earlier today, and we were sending poster designs to FedEx. I'm hoping I'm going to have a cool one ready for tomorrow. But we'll announce those and some other things to get you ready for No King's Day on Saturday. So very, very excited about that. Very excited to be out there. with many of you. This is a very important day. And we'll remind you tomorrow what, Xander, we have been reminding folks of since the last one in October, which is your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to take someone to the No King's Day protest. It's not just to take yourself. That's a foregone conclusion. We're assuming all of you are going to find a way to get out there, even for just a minute on Saturday. And if you're, misanthropic or just shy, you don't have to go hang out in the crowd. You could just show up on the margins of the crowd, but you got to bring someone. You got to bring someone. That's how movements grow. There are thousands of people watching this live stream right now. If just the people on this live stream brought a couple of friends, we would be enough to represent a little tiny town showing up at the No King's Day protest. It is so important that you do that. And I'm putting my money where my mouth is. I've been messaging friends. We're going to take people out to the rallies. Please do the same thing. Xander, anything else to add to that?
I think you mostly would have been proud of me yesterday when I filled in at the end because you had to jump. But the one area you would have been upset with me in is I skewed your sign off. I didn't get the sign off right. I tried to remember it. I looked to Mercedes. She didn't have. I just said bye. I panicked and I said bye and see you tomorrow. So we need you to do a proper sign off.
What's so funny is before jumping, I had to go into a dinner in DC and then to another meeting, and I was talking to a couple of people about the Iran war, and I almost put in the chat, Xander, hey, I usually end the program by saying, just so you had it. But I was like, nah, man, he remembers.
I don't think it would have helped, Miles. Honestly, I had the same blindness as when my wife tells me something's in the fridge and I'm looking and it's like it all goes white and I can't find any, even though the thing I'm looking for is right in front of me. So it wouldn't have helped. I was panicking. I just said goodbye. Sign us off. Hit us with the real deal.
Well, listen, friends, we're very excited to have you join us tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern. Like Xander said, it's our weekly mission brief. If you're meeting us for the first time, this is what it's all about. Is every Wednesday we talk about real actions we are taking. And sorry, one more thing, Xander. I know our producer's sitting there. She's like, we're going way over time. Stop it, guys. But I want to say one more thing. Xander and I, every couple of days, get to sit down and look at the month or two out of different proposals we've gotten from Defiance.org members of what to fund, what abuses of power from the federal government we should go after. We factor that into what happens in our monthly member meetings, which will be next week. And then we decide, here's what we're going to go do. This upcoming pipeline is bonkers. It is fun. So it is powerful. We have amazing ideas. We have national activations that are going to take place at a sweeping scale. There's some really exciting things coming up. And I just want to say a big thank you to this community and the incredibly creative and brave and patriotic people out there who keep proposing ways for us to protect this country and the rule of law. We're making headway, friends. We're making headway not just at Defiance.org, but as a country. So thank you so much. And in the meantime, as I always say, Xander, stay loud, stay brave, and stay together. We'll see you tomorrow.